As I talk to couples or even single people who have roommates, one of the most common complaints I hear is we just can't seem to get along. Why is it that we fight so much? Why do we have so much conflict? I mean, I hear from families. Why do we fight so much in our family? We love each other, but why is it we get angry and have blowups over petty, minor issues? I talk with parents of adult kids, and they'll say, with my kids, there just seems to be this constant underlining tension. I don't understand it. Someone, it seems, is always fighting with somebody else. So today, let's just talk about that in this series, Red Flags. But to get the most out of this message, right here at the outset, I want you to think, okay? I want you to think of the person who causes the hair on your neck to rise, the person who causes your anger to elevate, the person who seems to cause conflict in your life. Think of them right now. And one of the things I want you to do is have them in your mind the whole entire time. Now, what I like about the Bible, okay, is that the writers, they don't beat around the bush. The writers seem to often get right to the point. They don't waste any time. And the writer of this verse in the Bible is the half-brother of Jesus. Long before modern psychology came along, he had some profound insights as to the cause of conflict. Okay, so the half-brother of Jesus, his name is James, says in the book that bears his name, so it's James chapter 4, verse 1, what leads to the unending quarrels and conflict among you? Do they not come from your hedonistic or selfish desires that wage war in your bodily members, fighting for control over you? Now that's the Amplified Bible, and it inserts the word, it's kind of unfortunate in some ways, it inserts the word hedonistic, but most of us, we know that word is just another word for really selfishness or selfish. And many of your Bibles, if you're following along in a Bible right now, it says evil desires, but literally the word is selfish desires. So what James, the half-brother of Jesus, is saying is there's this like entire army of selfishness in us waging war for our minds and for our hearts and like for our whole entire lives. So what James is saying is the cause of arguments or conflict is selfishness. He says it's these selfish desires. In other words, when my army comes against your army, then missiles of frustration and anger artillery and bombs of bitterness are going to fly. Like when my wants conflict with your wants, sparks are going to fly. It's selfishness. And selfishness starts early in life. I mean, it starts even before a little baby can talk, right? Did you ever notice that when a baby, if their needs aren't instantly gratified, they'll let you know it, right? Crying, right? One of our daughters, before she could talk, I remember taking something away from her. At the time, she wasn't old enough to talk, so she turned around, she took my backpack and literally dumped it over. Well, I got the message real quickly. She was ticked. She was angry. And even though she didn't know how to organize a planned, all-out offensive, it still came out of her body, right? It's not just kids. Marriage has built into it conflict. It's the nature of the beast. I mean, if you ever want to laugh, okay, for those of you who are married, go home and make a list of the things that you expected from your spouse before you got married. How idealistic, right? Men, okay, I'm married. Men thought, I'll just walk in the door and she'll have a glass of something cold ready for me. She'll have my slippers in hand and she'll place them on my feet. I mean, we'll have sex all the time. It'll just be wonderful. And, wives thought, every day he'll bring home a bouquet of roses and we'll do the dishes together. And as we do, we'll talk and talk and talk. What a rude awakening it was the day you woke up from that dream. All marriages go through 3 stages. Stage 1 is the happy honeymoon. Stage 2 is the party's over. And stage 3 is let's make a deal, okay? And you've got to learn at that stage, like, how do you handle the frustration, the anger, the conflict? There's nothing that breaks us as humans like when we have a conflict with someone we really love and deeply care about, especially when it's our spouse or one of our kids or our parents or possibly a best friend. And so today we want to apply this stuff specifically to marriages. Yet these principles we can apply to any conflict we're trying to resolve. You can use this stuff wherever it is you're experiencing conflict. In fact, it could be somebody at your church or at your place of employment. So let's just say these three things. Wherever there are humans, okay, these are important points. Wherever there are humans, there will be conflict. Just let's get that clear. Number two, conflict can be either constructive or destructive. And then the third thing I wanted to say is strong relationships, including strong marriages, they fight cleanly. And weak relationships or weak marriages, they fight dirty. See, conflict can be constructive or destructive. Constructive conflict leads to resolution and closeness and then renewed intimacy between you and another person. Destructive conflict is all about two people who are pressing for victory, thinking that somebody's got to win this thing. And the result of that is often alienation. Then a wedge is driven into the relationship, and often what's experienced is deep hurt. And then revenge becomes the big word of the day, and revenge is never a good idea in relationships, in case you didn't know that, right? Now, there's a story of a lady who was late for work, and so she asked her husband to zip up her dress. So he started to joke around, and so he went up to her, and he was in the back, and went zip, 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 zip. Well, the zipper snapped off in his hands, and it broke the zipper, and her dress couldn't be worn, and she was livid. She was so angry. She was so mad at him that he decided to leave early for work. So she gets home at the end of the day, and she's madder than she was at the beginning of the day. She comes into the driveway, and there's her husband working under his car in the driveway. She looks at him, and just his legs are sticking out from underneath the car, and so she gets this idea for revenge. So she reaches down, and she grabs the top of his jeans, grabs his zipper, and goes zip, 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 zip. And then she walks into the house feeling good at what she just had done. But guess what? There she finds her husband standing in the kitchen. And she says to him, what are you doing here? He says, well, I'm making dinner. Why? To which she says, well, who's that underneath your car? He says, well, that's Joe, our next door neighbor. He's helping me with our car. She goes, oh, no. So she's mortified. She sprints outside and says, Joe, I'm so sorry. But there's no response. So she says again, Joe, really, I'm so sorry. I thought you were. There's no response. Well, he's just lying there. His body's limp. Then it dawned on her. He did what most of us would do if someone grabbed your zipper in that position. He rose up, bonked his head on the car underneath, knocked himself out cold. She and her husband pulled this guy's limp body out from underneath the car, and they both realized revenge is never a good idea. Okay, if revenge isn't an option, what do we, human, do in the context of, again, this is marriage, but it could be in any relationship. And I like to say it this way. It's mature people who learn to resolve conflict. So the key principle for this entire talk today is the starting point of resolving conflict begins with humility. That's the core. And in James, remember the half-brother of Jesus, in James chapter 4, verses 6 and 10, it says this, God gives us more and more strength to stand against such evil, selfish desires. As the scriptures say, God sets himself against the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. And then in James 4:10, it says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up, and he'll give you honor. It says that God will show favor to the humble. So what does it mean in the context of a relationship? I would even say a marriage relationship. What does it mean to humble yourself? First, you got to be willing, have a willingness to give in to God. Notice he says in James chapter 4, verse 7, humble yourselves before the Lord. So the first thing you do is you literally give in to God. James is saying, let God be God in your life. You give him control. You put him in charge. And this is huge for us as people. Remember, with verse 1, where we started for this discussion here today, where it says these hedonistic, selfish desires that make war inside of you, the end result for you is conflict. It's going to happen between you and your spouse if you're married, between you and a coworker in your job, primarily because we've got conflict going on inside of us as people. And James says we don't get along with other people because we've got civil war going on in our own lives. So we got to have peace inside before we can have peace outside with other people. The real conflict is inside of us. The issue is, who's in charge of your life? You see, sir, ma'am, if you're in charge and things don't go as you want them to go in your marriage, then you get irritable, you get upset, you get frustrated. But if God is in control and he's living in and through you, your response is a totally different story. So let me just come clean with you all right now, because you may not know me. The early years of Sue and my marriage were terrible. And although I can't imagine life without Sue now, there was a time where I didn't think it could be like that. I mean, the first 6 to 7 years of our marriage, there was tremendous conflict, incredible conflicts. I mean, we fought over everything. We were in love with each other, but we just didn't get along. And it was bad. I mean, really bad. I've said many times before, I'd be divorced today if it weren't for Jesus. Because when we said I do, we both said divorce is not an option, and we said we're going to work on this marriage thing even if it kills us. And it nearly did. I mean, divorce was not an option for us. Murder? No, that's another story. We just didn't get along. Why? Because of selfish desires. And I'm just going to tell you all right now, my pride, my male pride was out of freaking control. We tried everything. We just didn't get along. And it wasn't until I stopped praying, Lord, change Sue, and I started praying, Lord, change me. And what does it mean to give in to God? It means you learn to say, thy will be done. Thy, God, your will be done instead of my will be done in this marriage. So the first step to humility is giving in to God. The second is you got to get wise to the actions of the devil. Wise up, be aware, be alert. I don't know how else to say it. Just realize what he's doing. Realize where the conflict comes from. Realize that he's the source behind it. It's not your spouse. Don't be dumb. Don't be ignorant. It's the devil. James 4:7 says, so humble yourselves before God. And then look at this. It says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Now the word resist is another war term. It means to be prepared, to be ready. See, listen to me right now. The devil wants to destroy you and your marriage. The devil wants to destroy you and your friendships. The devil wants to destroy you and your relationships with your kids, your coworkers. He does. He wants to destroy every good relationship in your life. Why? Because he loves conflict. He loves arguments. He wants to cause confusion and hurt and disappointment and anger and chaos. So James says, give unto God and humble yourself, and then take defensive action, resisting the devil. Realize what he's doing. 2 Corinthians 2 says, so that Satan will not outsmart you or me. For we are very familiar with his evil schemes. So get familiar with what he's trying to do. So Paul says, wise up. Understand how the devil operates. And how does the devil operate? You know, like I think sometimes when I mention the devil, some of you think he stands around in a red suit and a pitchfork. No. How does the devil operate? You know how he operates? I'll tell you right now how he plays on your pride, on our pride, particularly wounded pride. He tells us what we want to hear. So like in a marriage, he whispers in our ear. He gives us these little thoughts and suggestions and ideas. So when you're in the middle of a disagreement with your spouse, and again, you can use this in any relationship, but I'm using it in marriage. You're in the middle of a fight. The devil starts whispering in your ear things like, hey, Tim, you don't have to take that kind of stuff from her. Or you don't have to take that kind of stuff from him, Sue. Or is it like, retaliate, Tim, get back at her. Or retaliate, Sue, get back at Tim. Or you're like, he'll whisper in your ear, who do they think they are? Get even. Assert yourself. Don't put up with that. You show them who's boss. And all that's going on. That little dude's sitting on your shoulder, whispering all that inside your ear. And you need to realize how he operates and don't put up with it. See, we've already stated for the vast majority of human relationships, conflict is inevitable. Why? Because all parties are at the core selfish. Therefore, conflict will be a part of life, your life and mine. Now, the question is, will you do conflict well or will you do conflict poorly? So today what I want to do is end this little talk by giving you some tidbits, I guess, some little bits of advice that'll hopefully help you do conflict well in a marriage, in your job situation, in some friendships, or maybe in your family system. And the first little piece of advice I'd like to give is define the I's. The I's of I would say the storm, or define the what I'm feeling. Now, most of us, like here we are in Southern California, we hear of earthquakes, right? But most of us hear of hurricanes, that. And every hurricane has what's called an eye. A hurricane is a great visual picture of a conflict. Don't you think so? Because when you're in the middle of a fight with your spouse or with someone you love or someone you know, it kind of feels like a hurricane. It's as if the winds are whipping and you feel like you're going to be pushed over. Well, a hurricane is a great picture for us. And a hurricane has an eye. And every fight, every conflict in a marriage has at minimum two eyes, his eye and her eye. Now, counselors tell us that people come to talk to them about two things. One thing that they want to talk about, and one thing that they don't really want to talk about. It's the second one that a wise counselor tries to figure out how to pull out and deal with. And the I feel thing that's deep down inside of us as people, oftentimes that's not what we're willing to talk about. We need to communicate what we feel. You might say, I feel rejected to your spouse. That's okay to just say that. I feel. Or here's what I'm feeling. I miss the tenderness and affection you used to show me. Or say something like, I feel used. It's I. You're not blasting them. And if you start talking about things you feel, I'm going to tell you right now, that's the beginning of being able to deal with the conflict. So we must be able to communicate what I feel. And if we could get there quickly, then I'll tell you right now, I know from my own marriage, a lot of the conflicts would dissipate. Now, the next piece of advice I want to give is you got to know each other's conflict style. And I would say this is where businesses could work on this really well. Family systems, you could talk about this, and marriages, you definitely need to know this, where you have different conflict resolution styles. And you need to talk about your resolution style. There are 5 different ways that people like us resolve conflict, according to people that write about this stuff. First is yield. Some of you listening right now, you yield. We say, okay, we're going to do it your way. And whatever you want. And people who yield are usually quiet, timid people. Usually they're married to somebody on the opposite side of the spectrum that likes to win, right? But these folks don't want to fight, so they yield. We'll do it the way you want to do it. But I want to tell you right now, over a long period of time, that's a very unhealthy way to have a relationship. Why? Because resentment builds and builds and builds, okay? Oh, the next one, so you have yield. The next one is withdrawal. Now, this person, I'm going to say the people who are withdrawers, they have a low concern for the relationship. They don't really care for the relationship. Now, you might think that's harsh. They don't yield. They don't say, well, let's do it your way. They just leave. Emotionally, they leave. Some people, they physically leave. They just literally walk out of the house. And the conflict is just left hanging there. So it's never dealt with. And it's an inappropriate way to deal with conflict as an adult. It'll destroy your marriage. I'm telling you that right now. It'll destroy it over time. The next one is not just yield or withdraw, it's compromise. Now, I'm going to tell you all right now, compromise is halfway. Yield is your way. Withdraw is no way. Compromise is halfway. Compromise is where, in our culture these days, they always talk about compromise, right? Compromise is where both of us give up about half. And we meet somewhere in the middle. So we're both happy, right? Well, I'm going to say right now, usually not. We're about as happy as 50% can be. And what we usually do is we focus on the things that we gave up. And I'm going to just tell you right now, compromise sucks. Well, the next one is win. So you got yield, withdraw, compromise, and then win. Win is we're going to do it my way. And if you're an overly competitive person, then I'm telling you right now, you see every conflict is a game to win. Now, if 2 people are married with the win conflict resolution style, and that means every conflict is like World War III every time something comes up, because you both must win. But when you have a win and a yielder in a relationship, I'm telling you right now, that can be very unhealthy. If you have 2 winners, it can be very unhealthy. You've got to work through the conflict very, very carefully. Then the last one is resolve. Resolve. This is what you should be shooting for in an adult, mature relationship. This is what you should be hoping for. That's our way. This is where both people, literally, they both win. And let me define a resolution for you. Resolution is coming up with a solution that both of you as people are 100% happy with. And you say, man, that sounds like a whole lot of work. Can't I just keep winning and she'll yield and then we'll be fine? Or can't I just keep withdrawing and she'll win and we'll both be happy? No, because that's not a healthy way to do life. Those conflicts aren't being resolved or dealt with. They're just being shelved. The feelings are still there. And over time, they drive a wedge into a relationship, which makes it very difficult for you to be intimate with one another. And so that's where people usually say, okay, we're going to go our separate ways. So I just want to encourage you to do the hard work of resolving. Do the hard work of coming to a solution that both of you can be 100% happy with. Now, how do you get there? Well, that's the next piece of advice. And the next piece of advice is understand that a humble person, listen to me now, always makes the first move. We need to make the first move because here's the deal. Pride makes the second move. Humility initiates. A prideful person says, you know what? When she comes to me and she says she's sorry, then I'll say I'm sorry. But humility says, regardless of his or her response, I'm going to make the first move. I'm going to do whatever it takes to heal this relationship. I'm not going to wait for them, even though I'd feel better about me if I waited for them. No, I'm going to push that aside and I'm going to do what I need to do to heal this. Let me tell you something. That's humility. The key is to make the first move. And some of you have never heard your spouse say these words. I was wrong. Will you forgive me? In fact, if you're right now, I don't know where you are driving, you're working out, you're sitting somewhere where you're watching this, whether you're by yourself or you're with somebody you know, I want you right now just to practice this, just out loud. Can we try it? Say so. I'm gonna say it. Here we go. Ready? Ready? And you repeat after me. Here we go. Okay. Say it. I was wrong. Say that. I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Now, some of you are like having a really hard time. No, I was wrong. Will you forgive me? And if you're listening to this right now with your spouse, it's even better. Turn to your spouse right now and say to them, I was wrong. You're just practicing. I was wrong. Will you forgive me? Now, that was kind of fun, wasn't it? Now, some of you probably never heard that before. Practice saying that because the quicker you can say that in a conflict situation, I'll tell you right now, the quicker the conflict will be resolved. But somebody's got to make the first move. Now, the next piece of advice is learn in your marriage, particularly, to focus on the upside instead of the downside. So one of the things that Sue and I like to think about is when we're having some tension of like the negative, we try to go, okay, what are 10 positive qualities? 10 positive qualities about you, 10 positive qualities about me, right? And you discipline to think yourself with the upside because when you're in the middle of a conflict, the only thing your mind and heart wants to go to is you're focusing on the downsides, the yucky stuff, the negative qualities. But you got to discipline yourself to think about the positive things. And then the last thing, and this is a real simple tip, okay, now, is treat your spouse like you would a friend. Because we treat our family members worse than we would ever dream of treating somebody we consider a friend. Because we're afraid of losing our friends, but we think, well, our spouse is locked in, so I can treat them that way. I can treat them anyway because they're not going anywhere. Well, that's a terrible attitude, completely inappropriate. When you're in the middle of a conflict, take a step back and ask yourself, if she or he, like my spouse, was my friend, would I be treating them this way? Would I lose them as a friend if I treated them this way? I need to treat them at least as well as I treat a friend. So when you get in a conflict, a fight, resolve it. One of you make the first move. Deal with it quickly. Think about the positive stuff. Communicate to your spouse what you find positive about them, and then treat your spouse at least as well as you treat a friend. Treat a friend. And then what'll happen with that is you will immediately find a point of resolution between you and your partner. See, this is stuff, friends. This is stuff that you can use anywhere in life. But where it most importantly needs to be used and leveraged is in the context of our marriages. Would you do it there? In fact, for those of you right now who are listening and you're married, those of you who are listening and you have a situation, maybe with a parent, a sibling, or a coworker that's just out of sorts, and you're having a hard time because of conflict, maybe something you did, something they did. I don't care. But right now, I want to pray for you that God would help you to be the one who moves out and resolves that conflict. Let's pray right now. God, I pray for each and every person listening. I pray for each and every person listening. It might be in the context of a friendship, in the context of their employment. It might be in the family system they're in, or it could be very, very truly, right, like with somebody they're going to be in bed with this very evening. And so, God, I pray that for those who are listening this right now, that they would make the first move. Be humble. Be humble, because Satan wants them, the devil wants them to stay resolutely in their pride. But God, I pray that they would humble themselves and make the first move and resolve the conflict. And God, would you bring unity? Would you bring healing? Would you bring health in the context of the relationships of those who are listening, particularly those who are married? And God, I pray that it'll have a profound influence because we'll take that step to make things right. This is what we pray now. In Jesus' name, amen.